In this lecture, I'd like to discuss Nietzsche as artist, and also, I don't know if it's on what we might call the course syllabus, but Nietzsche and his political uses. And the two are deeply interconnected. I have said that I don't want to treat Nietzsche as a mere literary figure. And when I say Nietzsche as artist, I have in mind this strong project of self-creation, which is to make of one's own life a work of art. Very difficult thing is to sculpt oneself. It's much easier to sculpt in stone than to sculpt in that invisible, mysterious material of the self. So Nietzsche as artist is a complex figure, and Nietzsche as that complex figure has had complex and multiple uses within social and political discourse. And I suggested one last time when I discussed the work of Foucault. And also I tried to indicate how Nietzsche's view of power as macrological, as in a sense horizontal, cutting deeply into what used to be referred to as subjectivity, but which today would be referred to more accurately as the terrain of advertising. That account I tried to make clear last time. And I wanted one last example there before moving on. And I think that this one may have some political edge to it as well. And it has to do with the description, with whether we accept in a certain way descriptions that are offered to us by a culture that I have now begun, or I will now begin, to characterize as postmodern, or at least as a trajectory towards a culture that is postmodern. I mean, a pure postmodern culture is, for me, a strange and bizarre and unthinkable thing because it would have completely effaced subjects. So the subject of subjectivity would have dropped out, as well as the subject of things like Nietzsche would have dropped out as anything other than as, say, the labels for beer advertisements or whatever. So we don't have a pure postmodern culture in any respect now. We have one between modernism and postmodernism. We are in what Gramsci called an interregnum, about which he used as a word to describe periods in history where things are changing rapidly and people don't know what's going on exactly. And I think that's the kind of period we're in now. And about interregnums, Gramsci said, in them many morbid symptoms appear. And so it may be that Nietzsche here could help us as a symptomatologist of some of our more modern sort of morbid symptoms. One of them that I'd like to mention has to do with psychoanalysis and therapy, since it's well known that Nietzsche has been praised as a great forerunner of psychoanalysis. The original project of psychoanalysis, according to Freud, was that the id, or the it, the unconscious, unreflected parts of ourselves, become reflected parts, become the I, the ego. That was Freud's project for psychoanalysis. Well, since Freud, I think we can understand that we're in what is now a mass culture which is thoroughly commodified. The role of that culture is what might be characterized and has been characterized by the Frankfurt School as psychoanalysis in reverse. Namely, that the parts of us that are reflected, self-consciously creating, become unconscious. Just sort of psychoanalysis in reverse gear. That the moments of lucidity and clarity we thought we had about ourselves are now to be filled in with stories that we pick up largely from the mass culture. Therapy now belongs, for me at least, to that terrain. And I have in mind all the various programs, projects, self-help books, 12-step plans, 10-step plans, fad diets, happy books, how to find your true self books, and so on. And I'd like to compare Nietzsche here with another theorist about whom I have a very high regard, and that's Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard's account of the self is in interesting ways like Nietzsche's, although more desperate in some respects. He may even be a more radical thinker. We may have to do a course on Kierkegaard eventually. But for Kierkegaard, and I think this might be true for Nietzsche as well, given his view of the self, the search for an authentic self is doomed in a sense to fail, because the self is these correlation of selves, of narratives, of stories, that, as it were, have to have a sort of origin from the creating aspect of you, rather than to be simply picked up as narratives from the mass culture. So if you've finished a 12-step plan devised by one of the lumpen intelligentsia, and by the time you reach the end of it you go, now I finally know who I am, you're in deep, deep doo-doo, because what you've precisely lost, according to someone like Nietzsche or Kierkegaard, is yourself, to the extent that it was even a constructed and interesting self. There's a simple Kierkegaardian reason why these pop therapies will not work. They cannot cure despair, because the self is a relation that relates itself to its own self in despair. The self, to the extent that it is at all, is a despairing relation, a deferred despairing relation. Now, Nietzsche puts a happy twist on that. It's a deferred, well, not happy, he's not that happy about anything. He puts a twist on it that the self is a risky relation to itself. But, my God, you can't be cured of what it is you are, and the person doing the curing isn't cured of it. I mean, you don't get cured of what it is that constitutes, because if you got cured of that, it would simply mean you don't have that any longer. The threat of a postmodern culture is not to have that deferring relation of despair at all, but simply some bland, banal smile at the end of a 10-point program and a nice 3-minute anecdote for Phil Donahue or Sally Jesse Raphael. A culture that picks its meanings up in that way is beneath contempt and beneath the level of civilization, I might add. Sorry, my view it is. It's beneath contempt. You cannot be cured of that despairing relation which constitutes what subjectivity is without being cured of something far more important, namely that very project, risky, dangerous, tricky project of subjectivity. So if you're out there looking for 10, 12-point plans, diets that will make you happy, exercise until you drop and cannot think, whatever various things the culture is offering in that regard, remember that it's the very object of this mass commodified culture is psychoanalysis in reverse, to give you some other story about yourself than the stories you're developing. Now, that if you think you're mad, see, that may not be much comfort. You know, I'm mad, I need help, I'm insane, and I'm happy. Well, sorry. Actually, madness becomes, at this point, I think, and in a culture like ours, maybe we should return to a sort of a feudal view of madness. In the feudal period, the mad were looked upon as having brilliant insights of wisdom, because they would say things that were outside the bounds of normal talk. And their sayings, as you may know, and this was true even in Greece, their sayings were frequently considered to be profound and absolutely worth your attention. And it wasn't until Freud that we again began to pay attention to these mad ramblings and interpret them as though they might contain something worth understanding. Something worth understanding. So there are far worse things than being mad. And one of them is to be in a culture that is mad and to consider yourself sane. That's worse. To be involved in a consensual hallucination of normalcy is much worse than being mad. So maybe I would like to valorize madness in this way. I mean, in the plays of Shakespeare, which I will now briefly discuss, because I didn't mean to imply ever that I didn't enjoy them. Has anyone ever noticed how frequently Shakespeare makes use of the fool to deliver the wisdom? Dialectically and brilliantly, Shakespeare will have the fool sort of skip onto the stage and deliver the wisdom. Even in Hamlet, the gravedigger who plays the fool in Hamlet is dead. See, Hamlet's a dark play. Yorick is the king's jester. He's dead already, but the gravedigger does a nice stand-in for him in the scene. He delivers some of the real wisdom of the play. Throughout Shakespeare, we have these fools, madmen, jugglers, jesters, clowns, delivering the real wisdom of the play. And it's perverse to see a culture that then takes some of this Shakespearean wisdom, you know, whatever, from the canon and sort of perverts it. I mean, I remember studying Shakespeare, and they gave me this quote to remember from Polonius, you know, "To thine own self be true." This could be the first line of every 12-step plan or therapy. "To thine own self be true, and it follows as the night the day, that thou cannot then be false to any man." Of course, in the context of the play, you realize that Polonius is a bureaucrat, a politician, a windbag, a blowhard, shallow, stupid, and his wisdom is, as I said earlier, just exactly the banality of a common mind. But yet, you know, grade school, we teach this. See how smart Shakespeare was? Yeah, he was smart enough to show that that wasn't wisdom. That kind of commonplace crap wasn't wisdom. He was that smart and more. Well, anyway, Nietzsche, in search of other self-descriptions and in search of new myths to replace the dying old ones, myths that we could, as it were, participate in and perhaps enjoy and enhance life, rather than, you know, in the case of many of these therapeutic approaches, put an end to the struggle of subjectivity by putting an end to our own subjectivity. One of the fascinating and, I mean, absolutely uninterpretable books of Nietzsche's that I intend to discuss briefly is Thus Spoke Zarathustra, which is about 4 or 5 things at once, at least, as a text. One is a rather extended and humorous parody of the Bible, the New Testament. Sorry, I mean, it's a rather, you know, it's the Sermon on the Mount is parodied by having Zarathustra, the religious seer and sage, give his Sermon on the Mount to a group of cows. Right. Making the point, I guess, that certain kinds of wisdom aren't appropriate for certain kinds of audiences. Whatever, I don't know. But in any case, Zarathustra constitutes this beautiful parody in that way. On the other hand, it is beautifully written, and it is an exemplification of what Nietzsche calls the gay science. Rather than talking about the gay science, Zarathustra is a text that is supposed to enact it, as it were. Sort of enact the gay science and say, well, in the act of self-creation, free beings, these so-called Übermenches, which I hate that word because of all of its associations, Superman, you know. Well, anyway, these free beings, new creating beings, will write texts like this one, Zarathustra. Exciting, interesting. Well, at one level, it's that too. It's a sort of self-indulgent text, and it's certainly one that I enjoyed more, and this isn't, I don't mind admitting this, that I enjoyed more when I read it when I was 18 than when I reread it years later. It has a certain adolescent fascination for us. It has a certain kind of adolescent fascination. That's true of a lot of the text of Nietzsche, and I don't want to put that down. The reason I don't is because one of the fascinating things about these multiple kinds of texts by Nietzsche is that adolescent fascination effect that it has for youth and creativity and interest. T.S. Eliot, in a famous critical piece on Hamlet, said that Hamlet was a failed play because Shakespeare tried to express in drama these overblown adolescent sentiments that could not be, you know, correctly placed within the form of art. Well, that's true, but hardly reduces the interest to us of the Hamlet character. It hardly is a critique of his dialogue with himself that he's an adolescent. I mean, for me, it's not, and if it's a flawed play, then we wish to God more flawed plays were written that were that interestingly flawed. So I think Eliot was a bit of a prig about this, as he was about most things. In any case, the Dance of Zarathustra is not a 10-point plan. It's not self-help, and you won't find your authentic self reading Zarathustra. You are supposed to, A, have a good time reading it, B, get a laugh out of it, and C, be challenged by it to try to see if you can remember enough of your own adolescence, perhaps to either scribble something down or do something a little wild. Several and multiple effects can come out of reading this text. Many and multiple effects can come out of reading it. I mentioned that one parody scene where Zarathustra's wisdom, his famous Sermon on the Mount, is given to a group of cows. There's another particularly humorous part that I like. It's in the opening when, as in many religious myths, of which Zarathustra purports to both be one and a criticism of one and a joke about them, all three. Zarathustra, like many religious myths, begin with the prophet, the seer, the person of wisdom, separated, sort of like Jesus in the desert. Then he comes back and begins his mission. Buddha under the tree, long time sitting, gets up, starts his mission. Well, Zarathustra's all alone, except for his eagle and his snake. I don't know what they mean. They're just characters in the thing. I mean, they could mean a lot of things. He's got a snake around his neck and an eagle. He goes down, and the first person he meets as he goes to share his idea of the death of God and the birth of these new festivals in this wonderful poetic book. And the first person he meets is an old hermit in the woods. And the old hermit, and he discussed religion and gods and things. And Zarathustra, he asked Zarathustra to, give his gift to, to everyone and so on. And Zarathustra goes, no, I can't give you a gift. In fact, if I keep talking to you, I will probably take something from you. And then he leaves. And then he thinks to himself about the old man. He goes, can it be this old man hasn't heard about the death of God? And you're going, well, geez, that's a hell of a way for a myth to start, the old man in the forest stays there, I guess, throughout the rest of Zarathustra, and he goes into the marketplace and begins to, say the kind of weird, hyperbolic, bizarre things with which Zarathustra is filled. I'll share a few of those with you. I don't want to do a detailed reading of it. It's too complicated. It's too intricate, and so I'll just give you a little taste for it and hope that you will read it at some point. So I say that the best point to read it, many of us have passed. And that's in terms of enjoyment. Read it when you're 17 or 18 and just, wow, and really like it, enjoy it, and get off to it. That fascination effect, I'll call it. But one of the scenes I like a lot is when he encounters a Buddha-like figure in it. And you expect sort of a vicious polemic against Buddhism, and you don't get one at all. Zarathustra leaves and says, that old man is very wise, talking about now this figure that is a trope or a metaphor for the Buddha within Zarathustra. He says, that old man is very wise. If I were into sleep, this is the way he understood Buddhism, if I were into sleep, which is how he understands the annihilation of the self and nirvana and stuff, he says, no one teaches sleep better than that old man. And if I were into it, if I were a person into sleep and being into sleepiness, nobody is a better teacher of that than him. And that's the famous book I've already referred to, where he ends by saying, blessed, in fact, are the sleepy, for they shall soon drop off. It's a nice, one of my favorite Nietzsche quotes. Blessed are the sleepy, for they shall soon drop off. Well, to return to the postmodern terrain, Buddhism, as we now know, along with many other religions, are antiquated in the face of a telecommunicational network which has more than replaced all the functions of traditional religion. More than replaced it, subjectively and objectively. And, Plato's cave, we don't need to see the shadows on the wall because the shadows are in our television, and we have televisions. It is a stupid strategy to think that you can turn them off. All that can happen is they can turn you off. You can't turn them off. Try to explain that remark, because many people around universities love to brag, I don't watch TV. Well, damn, that's historically crazy and unconscious. Don't you realize that's something like saying after the invention of the Gutenberg printing press and then later the availability of cheap printed material to go snottily around saying, well, I only read things handwritten in Latin. I don't read these new books off these printing presses. These paperbacks, To hell with them, they're the devil's things. I don't read those paperbacks. Well, that's how I feel about intellectuals. I don't watch movies, I don't watch TV. As if you could escape an entire world whose culture is being shaped by this, and the subjectivities of millions of what will be culture and objective spirit, shaped by these new instruments and new forces, as if one could escape it by turning a switch. That's why I say you can't turn off TV. It can turn you off, but you can't turn it off. You can't make it disappear, but it can make you disappear. I mean, it's just not that relation. Nietzsche, of course, when he talked about nihilism in The Last Man, had no idea that nihilism would be technologically achievable and that it would not upset people as much as he thought. That the death of human subjectivity, that the end of projects that are our own, and the turn towards projects invented, packaged for us, sometimes by machines and not even by human advertisers or whatever, but just simply packaged by machine, along demographic programs written up by other machines, that would become the new array of things that are supposed to give us meaning, is, as it were, beyond nihilism. You know, this is not a culture that believes in nothing. This is a culture that is rooted in the will to nothingness, in Nietzsche's sense, and at the same time is, in a certain sense, giddy about it. I mean, there's a certain giddiness to it that I don't want to deny. You know, a sort of giddy feeling that well, you know, if you took undergraduate philosophy and you read Descartes, you thought, oh, maybe an evil demon is fooling me all the time. And you just thought about it in Introduction to Philosophy class as a thought experiment that you might be wrong, and then you were going to, regain your reason. But now the greater skepticism has arisen that this whole telecommunicational world is one giant consensual hallucination within which you, as a singularity, Bill, Bob, Susan, and so on, simply cannot find your way about at all. It's not an evil demon anymore that you just thought up. You look at the fabric of social reality and become skeptical about your everyday life and whether it has any meaning at all. And this is not some empty skepticism, merely philosophical skepticism. It is quite general. Believe me, talk to your friends. Talk to people at gas stations, for God's sakes. Well, geez, I don't know what's going on anymore. It's so weird. The most standard phenomenological or descriptive remark about the current social terrain, to which I do believe Nietzsche pointed the way in his remarks, is haven't things gotten weird? Which isn't an analysis, but certainly points the way towards one, Things have gotten strange. I can explain why people take crack now instead of LSD. I can explain that using this view that things have gotten weird and that we have a postmodern trajectory. LSD is superfluous in the 90s. Reality itself is so twisted that it's a waste of time. Why would anyone take acid in this culture to try to twist your mind? Hell, just watch TV for a few months. You don't need that. You don't need acid anymore. It's just silly. It's just silly. It's a redundant drug. It's unnecessary in a culture like this one. It's a redundant drug. Now, crack, on the other hand, has a certain rationality to it from both the perspectives of the rulers and the ruled. For one thing, from the perspective of the rulers, the opium of the people, it turns out, is much better when it's real opium. So the opium of the people now is opium, and that's very copacetic for people who want to do crowd control. It's nice that the potentially rebellious crowds are stoned out of their minds, and crack does that. It doesn't give you this happy, I don't want to work, marijuana stuff. It's just out, okay? And that's good for the rulers. On the side of the ruled, the desperate, crack, unlike LSD, doesn't enhance or freakify anything. It just sort of nails your head out of things for a while. Sort of jacks you out of this consensual hallucination. It's vicious and it's an ugly drug. This is no argument. I'm trying to explain how drugs I mean, this is an important Nietzschean point, because Nietzsche thinks that intoxication, and this I try to make it fit, I think it does fit. Intoxication has always been an important part of cultures, certainly American culture. I mean, as many of you know, I'm a smoker, and that was our first, big commodity in the New World. This isn't the first New World Order we've had. There have been other New World Orders before this one. Well, anyway, Zarathustra, how does it relate to intoxication? Well, Zarathustra is supposed to be an intoxicating dance with the creation of new meaning. The threat faced now that I'm trying to raise concerns the entire text of Nietzsche and the entire text of theorists, literary and otherwise, who still dream what perhaps now, and I'm not saying for sure because this kind of theory can only be based on speculation, phenomenological description, and suspicion, and the little bits and pieces you pick up in your culture as you try to understand yourself. It is almost obvious that no coherent social theory could explain a situation like this one. Just seems, I think that's just obvious. I don't know. Other people may see it another way, but I don't. The prospects that Zarathustra, and this is what I'm raising now, the prospects that Zarathustra could become a mini-series, and I know who to cast. William Hurt would be great as Zarathustra. The reason is that William Hurt always plays the sort of intelligent types, So William Hurt would be great as Zarathustra. He even resembles the young Nietzsche in a vague kind of way. So, especially if he dyed his hair and made him look shorter, which probably wouldn't be a problem. But anyway, the very fact that we live in an objective culture where one might make a mini-series Zarathustra and then have tons of Zarathustrians afterwards that dressed like Zarathustra and it adopted those values is already a sign that nihilism itself is in a certain way not a strong enough name for the threat faced by human subjectivity and lived experience, what remains of it, in the terrain of our culture. And so I guess now I've moved sort of beyond trying to describe this beautiful poetic text, which I would ask you to read and enjoy, and onto another terrain, a terrain that is far different. And this won't come as a shock to younger people, because the search for meaning that I have been discussing is almost a joke of nostalgia among these people. I'll refer one more time to the movie Heathers. There's a sort of 1960s type teacher in that movie who says, "Oh, let's all hold hands and sing together." Well, all the young students just go, "Oh, God." Ugh. See, for them, that's no good anymore. Love, friendship, understanding, common bonds have all been now deferred into encounter groups. It's a long way from Wuthering Heights to Love Story by Eric Siegel. It's a tremendous historical distance. And yet it happens by degrees, so we barely notice. It's the way, maybe this is the way people have always lost their own self-projects, is by degrees. You wake up one morning and you notice that the journey you were on, you're not on it anymore, and somehow by degrees you've become something alien to yourself. I think this is a quite general experience in our culture, that by degrees and almost imperceptibly we become alien to ourselves, and that this is experienced by some of us older types, described by paleo-conservatives as refuge of the 60s. It's described by us as a sort of loss of lived experience, but by some of the younger, giddier type theorists of the postmodern, it's described as a kind of liberation. In other words, don't worry about alienation and ecstasy. Those things are over. Ecstasy is now the name of a designer drug for yuppies, and I don't want to hear about alienation because it's alienating to hear about it. We know that it's the case, but it's alienating for you to tell us about it. So it puts the critic in an unusual position in a society like that, because the critics of our society themselves are, of course, ordinarily commodified critics. I think that the best example of that might be shows like the old Martin Downey show, where you get a kind of populist, redneck kind of criticism, which is every bit as elevated as the McLaughlin group, and certainly you listen just as much. Has anybody ever seen, I mean, the McLaughlin group won't sue me for describing their show because they just go, crucifixion of Jesus, right or wrong? Wrong, 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 maybe, you know. The right answer is right, and then you just go. That's public discourse. Now notice about it this. While it is public, in the sense of publicity, it's unilateral, it's quick, it's fast, it's factoid. It is totalitarian. Of course. It's duck speak. You can't think that quickly. You gotta duck speak. I mean, this is why the breakup of the Soviet bloc creates great confusion, because we've been taught that duck speak so long that now we don't know exactly what to talk anymore. It's hard to go, well, those communists, Trojans, we never thought about that in the first place anyway. It's just duck speak. Now that it's all breaking up, new topics for duck speak are hard to find, and I guess one of them would be, you know, the Middle East. Those people are different than we are. Yeah. By the way, that is a moment of the communitarian in a postmodern landscape, is when you create a pseudo-community. A pseudo-community by opposing it to another pseudo-community. I'll give you an example. Saddam Hussein, as many people in the Arab world knew, wasn't exactly a good Muslim. But we had to construct a certain kind of sort of Muslimic threat that would be palpable to people in our own cities and stuff, out of this person, and to create a kind of pseudo-communitarian consensus on the other side. Well, you know, I don't like war in general, but we have to stop naked aggression, as opposed, I guess, to closed aggression. I've always, you know, looked at it the other way. Naked aggression seemed preferable to me than well-dressed, three-piece suited aggression. But you know, I'm a bit primitive about that, I suppose. In any case, what the postmodern condition is about is the drying up of lived experience. And I'll give you an argument I don't think I agree with, but it will set the stage. And it's, I want this argument to be kind of fun in the sense in which Zarathustra's fun. Don't take it that seriously, in other words. It's just one of these postmodern French theorists, Baudrillard, and it was his account of the war in Iraq. And I'm not giving it to you as mine, but as a gift. Come to think of it, maybe I shouldn't give you this gift because I might take something from you. No, that's a joke. I'm just joking. No, Baudrillard was giving the following account of the war in Iraq. He said, the name of it was in an interview in a German magazine, and this, remember, this is one of the postmodern theorists I'm talking about, not agreeing with. I'm saying that, in my view, there's a trajectory towards this condition. In the view of many of these people, we've already reached this condition of postmodern society, which I will specify at greater detail later, and connect to Nietzsche, because Nietzsche was one person who forecast the advent of a human-less, subject-less condition. Well, anyway, Baudrillard's account of the war was, the interview was called "The Enemy Has Disappeared." And Baudrillard said that the reason that the war had been constructed in Iraq as a constructed televisual event was that if anything was left in the world that was real, lived experience, it would be war. So that if this virtual society of a consensual hallucination could stage a phony war with phony experiences and have people respond to it phonily, the real war wouldn't be against the Iraqis but against reality, in order to kill the last remaining remnants of the real. That this society had already commodified reality to such an extent that they were down to the last few little niches of reality. And on the global stage, war looked like one, so it would be important to kill reality itself. Now, this is not to deny that Iraqis got killed and some of our citizens. But it's about the larger aims of the war was to kill reality itself, to make reality virtual reality and not real reality. A term that I now nostalgically use to refer to things like my own experiences and the experiences of other human beings. When I even talk that way, I feel kind of nostalgic about it. But Baudrillard's argument went, well, look, you know, where did we see the event? We saw it on television, and, you know, who is this Hussein? I mean, didn't hear about him before, haven't heard much about him since. Who is it? Well, now they're picking it back up a little, sorry. Who is this fellow, and what is this? I mean, is this a you know, his point was deep and important, that from the moment it started, it was a CNN event that had its own, as it were, support built into it, of which the opposition was itself a part. And the opposition to the war itself became a part of the support of the war in the very necessity to pick up the icons, the general, bland, and stupid icons without which you cannot appear. So it immediately caught you up. And I remember the rapt attention that we all had on the war, which was a magnificent miniseries in that sense. CNN was an addiction, you know. And the scuds at night were absolutely as virtual and as exciting as the rockets they shoot up at Epcot Center, those phony firework things. And you're going, oh yeah, but I really saw those scud pieces hit. Well, I didn't. I saw them on TV. And I'm not being skeptical and saying scuds didn't hit. I'm saying that the experience of that for us was virtual. And so I thought, well, Baudrillard, this is not what I'm saying. This is Baudrillard's argument. And he says, and it turns out they won because they proved war, like everything else, can be not a real experience at all either. It can become a virtual non-reality. A non-real war, an unreal war. Well, on one level, of course, I want to agree with Baudrillard because I don't call something a war where you started and the other side immediately retreats any more than I want to call something a boxing match when one guy takes a dive and the other guy keeps hitting him while he's on the canvas. If you take a dive, the match is over. Count 10, out you win, that's fine, but it doesn't continue to be a boxing match because you're hitting the person on the canvas. It's stopped being a boxing match then. It's become a spectacle. And one cannot overestimate the value of that as a spectacle, because it still dominates public discourse in the image of some of our leaders who have woefully neglected other things which are presented to us as our problems. If we could have anything other than a visual representation of those, a televisual one. In short, according to Baudrillard's argument, this saturated information network is pornographic. Now, what do I mean by that? It's pornographic in this sense. It is the excess of the visual, you know, excessively visual. Now, this experience may be differential for women, but for guys who are forced to go to stag movies when you're being socialized to be a young man, and if you don't go, they call you funny names. The first thing you notice about stag movies is that they're just excessively visual. After about 2 minutes, you say, oh, that's enough of that. I don't want to see anymore. It wasn't that pretty. Get it off. This is an obscene culture in that sense. I really mean that. It is pornographically visual, obsessive, and so on. So Baudrillard's argument was that the war had disappeared in the images of the war. The experience of the war had disappeared in the accounts of it. And I thought, well, surely that isn't true. This is me now. I'm back. That's Baudrillard's story. Now, I thought, surely that isn't true for the people who were over there, which is, of course, a good common sense thing to say. So I talked to one of the guards at my university who had served over there and was now back being a traffic guard. And it turned out that all she had seen was on CNN, too. She had been in her tent for the whole war, stacking various uniforms and things, and she said that no, she couldn't really tell me much about it. She asked me if I'd watched CNN. I said, yes. She said, well, did you hear the briefings? I went, yes. She said, well, that's what I know about it, basically. So I thought, well, I've got to get better information than that, because now I'm getting scared that Baudrillard is right. It really wasn't one over there. It wasn't a war. So I got to talk to a student friend of mine's brother who was a pilot. And he went, yeah, he said, those gun sights we used, he said, were just like the ones, you know, I can't mention a brand name or whatever, but one of those like asteroid games. He said, yeah, he said, the planes, it was great, giddy feeling. He said, but did you see any Iraqis, any land, any people? No. He said, these planes, he said, you wouldn't believe the rush. And he began to describe to me the experience of the virtual reality of flying playing very fast and shooting little dots of light through a target, like in a video arcade, except at a much higher rate of speed. And at that point, I began to stop doing these empirical tests on Baudrillard's theory, and now I'll just leave it as a thesis for you. If anything was left that was real, it might have been war. And it may be the case now that even war is not real. And that's a horrifying remark coming from someone who was raised by someone like my father, for whom the Second World War was a, if not the pivotal event in his life. And perhaps some of our postmodern dissatisfaction, anticipated by bizarre theorists like Nietzsche and Kierkegaard, perhaps to the extent there is dissatisfaction with it, perhaps some of that dissatisfaction is rooted in the desire to feel an experience again, to live a real experience again, something that really occurred, that wasn't already packaged, explained, prepackaged, agreed upon, then given to you as your opinion without a possibility of doing anything but assenting. And you may go, oh no, they give us choice. Well, we all know what the array is and how infinite it is. It's like choosing green beans at the grocery store. How many kinds do they have? Say you want canned green beans. I'm a throwback. I like canned green beans. I don't like the ones that you put in the little plastic pouch. I want the canned ones. And I get a choice. There are like 20 kinds. I've tried a lot of them. I open them and they're all just really bad green beans. They're green and they're beans and they're this long and they've got the same amount of water. And I've chosen, and that's true, I've chosen, and I want that freedom to choose, and I would fight and die for that freedom to choose the green bean of my choice. But what I don't have is the choice to select that autonomous radical project that Nietzsche put at the center of his writing and at the center of his attempt at self-creation. That's what the choice I don't have. I feel sometimes as though I'm plugged into a giant computer that will take every command I give it except the one that I want the most. The command that the damn machine blow itself up. It will do anything else. I'll say, I'll type in food. Now it comes food. I'll type in, I want to give this talk in Washington. Type this in, it comes out. But the one command I want is the command for the damn thing to just go boom. And all the little transistors just do glow. I think some of that archaic anarchism may lurk out there somewhere, I hope, that as I enter, now in this really strong paradox, because without a postmodern culture there would be no televised lectures on Nietzsche. I hope as I enter that spiral of information that I can, plant here and there tiny little moments of that kind of rebellion which are planted throughout the text of Zarathustra in the forms of jokes, arguments that are both suspicious and suspecting, and moments of transgression and fun. And I hope that I'll be able to do that in the last hour when I will wander even farther away from Nietzsche. But that is in the spirit of Nietzsche, because he always valorized wanderers, nomads, vagabonds, jokesters, and tricksters. And I intend to valorize them as well. So I hope you're ready for the concluding lecture on Nietzsche's progeny. That lecture, of course, has got to be some kind of joke. He had no children, so what would his progeny be? Well, I hope this indication of what I mean by the postmodern condition will give you an idea about the icy glacial terrain in which these progeny are slouching toward Bethlehem, waiting to be born.